Well, greetings to each of you. Welcome back to another episode of the Shakedown. I am Warden Dawson, your host. Glad to be back with you for another episode. Really enjoyed having Lieutenant Moats with us the last time. I hope you all enjoyed having him, and definitely going to have him come back on the podcast with us, especially as we continue through this series on officer survival. If you're just jumping in, just talking about some topics, not necessarily surviving an altercation or an assault or things like that, but more the things that we don't necessarily think about that could impact the longevity of our career, things that could take us out being in the field of corrections. And so, like I said, enjoyed having Lieutenant Moats with us talking about stress. And as I said, we'll definitely get him back on as we continue in this series. But wanted to take some time today and talk about how do we deal with a crisis, dealing with a crisis. And first of all, we need to define what we're talking about when we say a crisis. And the truth of the matter is that is a never-ending list. I mean, you would think of things like a riot, or you would think of things like our jail is built alongside a set of railroad tracks, and so we have to consider a train derailment, or maybe you think about a storm. Mike Haley from Louisiana, he taught last year in JailCom about how their jail had to deal with the hurricanes and the things they had to deal with. That was a crisis that they were confronted with. But as I said, the list goes on and on and on, and something that's fresh on our minds in recent events is dealing with COVID. I mean, sure, we considered dealing with illness or disease or sickness within our facilities, but had we thought about what we would do if we had a disease or an illness that was prevalent among the society as a whole, and how do we protect ourselves as a correctional facility? I know our nurse administrator, Ms. Charlotte, when that was kicking off, we sat down and we were like, look, we've got to come up with a plan. We've got to come up with a way to deal with this if we have an outbreak of COVID within our facility. And just, my sense of humor, as we started to work on that, I wrote down and said, we're going to call this the sky is falling manual. So if the sky falls, what are we going to do? And we had to think through that process and prepare for that crisis. Thankfully, we were blessed and we didn't have a huge outbreak, but I know that I've talked to folks that they did struggle and deal with COVID within their facility. So how do we deal with those crises? What are some things that we can do, regardless of the level that we're at in our position in corrections, whether we're a line officer, a frontline supervisor, a midline supervisor, we're a member of the administration. If how are we going to prepare and how are we going to deal with a crisis? Well, I'd say the first thing that we need to consider is that word I just used, and that is prepare. And as in law enforcement, often we talk about playing the what if game. What if this happens? What would I do? What if this happens? What resources would I have available? What if there was this storm, or there was this train derailment, or there was this infection among our inmate population of some illness or disease? What if that happens? What resources do I have available? What actions will I need to take? What preparations do I need to take now, just in case that takes place? We need to identify the what ifs, and that's going to be regional. That's going to be something that's probably going to be specific to your facility. There are going to be some things that are specific, but there's going to be other things that every jail, has got to deal with. How are you going to deal with an escape? How are you going to deal with a riot? How are you going to deal with a food shortage? How are you going to deal with, the list goes on and on and on, but we need to identify the what ifs. And then secondly, we need to identify what are we going to need to do for each of those things on that list. And I'll tell you, most agencies have a something resembling a crisis management manual. that dictates what we do when this happens or when that happens. And I've been working on, and I say been working on for about 2 years now, I've been working on updating hours for Morgan County and the correctional facility here. But one thing I realized as I began to dig into this is that it's almost impossible to think of and prepare for every single potential action or event that's going to take place. And another thing that I noticed is that there are a lot of them that are very similar. And so, I could make preparations, or I could think through preparations for those things and kind of group those things together. But I've got to think through. I've got to identify. I got to identify the what ifs. I've got to identify what is it that I'm going to need to do for each of those situations. In our agency in the sheriff's office here, we talked about when COVID started, and we talked about, well, what if there's shortages, whether it be water or whether it be fuel for the county vehicles, whether it be food. And so we got to looking at, all right, what are we going to need to operate if we can't get food? If, our food providers are like, look, we hadn't got it, we can't deliver anything, what are we going to do? Do we need to have an emergency stockpile of non-perishable food on hand that we could survive? Do we need to buy some fuel tanks and keep fuel on hand to be able to be prepared for that? Water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is it that we're going to need to do for each of those what ifs? And once we start thinking through that process, thirdly, we need to articulate exactly what it is that we need and exactly what it is that we're going to do in response to that crisis, whatever it may be. We need to write it down. We need to get together with others and discuss it and talk about what is it that we're going to do. If this happens, if this what if happens, we've got these tools in place. We've got these supplies in place. We're going to do step one is this. Step two is this. Step three is this. We need to articulate it. And if possible, we need to practice it. They say that when a crisis hits, or when you have to deal with something in the moment, you're only going to be as good as your training. There's a lot of things that kind of concerns me when I think about that, because how much have we as an agency prepared and trained for these potential crises that need to be? One of the things that's awesome about training for these things is you realize that sometimes what made sense on paper doesn't really make sense when you put it into practice. And so there's going to be adjustments that need to be made. And you say, okay, I know that's what we thought, but that's not going to work. So we need to cross that out, and we need to replace it with this. So we articulate, we practice, and we adjust. When I was a shift supervisor, sergeant, one of my responsibilities here at Morgan County is I was responsible for the CERT team. And we would spend time practicing, weekly and monthly. We would spend time practicing, cell extractions or responding to a riot, or someone trying to breach the facility, or someone trying to attempt to escape. We would practice those things, and we'd walk through these roles. We'd walk through this and say, all right, your job is this, your job is this, your job is this. All right, go. And I remember, when we would practice with our cell extraction teams, myself and one of the other supervisors, often, we play the role of the inmate. And so we get in this cell, and we give them a scenario, and we close the door, and here we are in this cell, and try to come up with some scenarios that the extraction team might not be expecting that an inmate or inmates might try doing. I remember one time we're in the cell, and this other supervisor and I, we had taken some shampoo in the cell with us, and so after we closed the cell door, we flagged the window on the cell, and we squirted this shampoo all over the floor, slung water on the floor, and then we went to the back of the cell. And, here they come, they make entrance. And I tell you what, escapades had nothing on this extraction team. I mean, they were slipping, sliding, falling all over the place. I mean, they weren't prepared. They weren't prepared for that. And had that been an actual extraction, it'd have been a train wreck, y'all. Somebody would have gotten hurt, and gotten hurt very badly. We stopped the scenario, and after we, the other supervisor and I got over our fits of laughter, and they got over their irritation, we went with another scenario, but we circled back to that scenario again. I'm going to tell you, the second time When they came in and they hit that shampoo, they were prepared. They're mentally they were prepared, physically they were prepared. They were ready, and they handled it. They took care of business and they did it well. So articulate, practice, and adjust. And when we think about crisis that we're going to have to deal with, often, I mean, just in those illustrations I just gave, often we think about crisis that would be facility-wide. But maybe you're a line officer. Maybe you're a frontline supervisor. And you say, look, I appreciate it, Warden, but I'm not responsible for site-wide or facility-wide crisis response. I'm responsible for this number of people. I'm responsible for this area. I'm not responsible for that. I'm going to be the one that they tell and say, all right, here's your role. Here's what you do. And that may be true. But most crises are not going to be facility-wide. It's going to be dealing with that single inmate. It's going to be dealing with that one housing unit. It's going to be dealing with that one person in the lobby or out in the parking lot, as the case may be. It's not going to be a facility-wide deal. So you as a line officer, you as a frontline supervisor, what would qualify as a crisis in your mind? Maybe you're doing a visual inspection. You're walking through the housing unit, and an inmate out of nowhere jumps on top of you. That's a crisis. That's a crisis. Maybe you're coming in to do head count. You're coming in to do rack down. Excuse me. You're coming in to pass out hygiene or serve chow, whatever the case may be. And man, something pops off right there in your face. That's a crisis. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for that what if? So articulate it, practice it. Talk to your other officers that you work with, and make adjustments as need be. But the last thing I want to mention about this in this episode of this podcast, guys, is that when it happens, let's say you're prepared. I mean, you identify the what ifs. What am I going to need? What tools, what personnel, whatever the case might be. We've identified what we're going to need. We've articulated it. We've practiced. We've adjusted our plan, and we perfected our plan. In the moment, what do we need to do to deal with a crisis? And we'll tell you, a lot of that is going to be psychological. It's going to be mental preparation. The first thing I would tell you is when you're facing a crisis, when you're dealing with a crisis, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is breathe. You can say, well, that's slightly ridiculous. Of course I'm going to breathe. That's part of human nature. Yeah, it is part of human nature. But I'm going to tell you, the conscious thought of I'm facing this, breathe, will make a huge difference. I don't know why it is. It's probably part of that fight or flight that we deal with as human beings. But man, something happens and we hold our breath, and we're froze. We hold our breath. We're walling ourselves off from whatever it is that we're dealing with. Breathe. Take a breath. The second thing I would tell you is get help. Now, I mean, let's say somebody jumps on you, and I mean you're just fighting for your life. Well, yeah, you may not be able to get help right away, but as soon as you are able, get on that radio, hit that intercom button, whatever the case may be, and get some help. I tell our officers here at Morgan County that I'm not looking to hire a bunch of Lone Rangers. And I think it's funny that even when you think about the Lone Ranger, the fictional character, the Lone Ranger, even though he was the Lone Ranger, he still had Tonto. He still had his partner. He still had somebody there to help him face whatever it was that he faced. And so I tell my guys here at Morgan County, I'm not looking to hire Lone Rangers. We are a team. We are the staff of the jail. We're here to assist each other. What makes this work is that we don't act one-on-one or three-on whatever. We come with force. It's the team. So breathe. Get some help. The third thing that I would tell you, it's going to sound kind of funny, but bear with me. The third thing I would tell you is be calm on the outside. Now, I'm not going to tell you to be calm on the inside, because the likelihood of you being able to do that in most cases is probably not going to be real high. Project calmness. Why? Well, first of all, what you project and you put out your mind is going to take that and it's going to start to be reflected on the inside. That could not might not happen instantaneously, but that calmness that you're projecting, that calmness that you're speaking, that calmness that you're acting out, that's going to begin to take over your mental processes and you're going to calm down. The second thing that does is it communicates to everybody else around you, this is no big deal. I got this. Regardless of how bad it looks, regardless of how bad it sounds, regardless of how bad it smells, whatever the case may be, I got this. I'm trained, I'm prepared mentally, I'm prepared physically, and I got this. Project that calmness. And you'll see the circumstance, the situation, that calmness will begin to take place, and the situation, the tension in the situation will begin to come down. The last thing I'll tell you guys is after it's all said and done, we get through the crisis. We get everything settled down. We get everything cleaned up. We've written our reports, and we're done with the situation. The last thing I will tell you is when you have faced a crisis, the last thing you need to do in dealing with that crisis is take care of you. We all see and deal with some things in this line of work that are messed up. We hear people say things. We see people do things to other people. We find out what that inmate is charged with and what crime they're accused of committing, or maybe they're convicted of committing. And there's some brutal and horrific stuff. We have conversations with people that we just can't believe that a human being has done that or has had to deal with that. All that goes in. And that is going to impact us. And then you have the stress of a crisis situation, and heaven forbid, somebody loses their life or somebody's injured traumatically in the process of it. That's going to impact us. That's going to affect us. Take care of you. There is no shame whatsoever in talking to somebody, be it a parent, be it a member of the clergy, be it a therapist, be it a counselor, whatever the case may be. Make sure that you take care of you. Because, guys, I'm going to tell you something. If we're not careful, this career will chew you up and spit you out. And I'm not talking about necessarily the physical altercations. Most importantly, though, it's the mental ones. It's the mental game. It's the things that we remember, the things that we've seen and heard and dealt with that eat us alive. Guys, there's a reason the statistics about health and about suicidality and about mental health and so forth and so on in this field, those numbers are so high. Take care of you. Well, guys, I hope that this little touch on dealing with a crisis, I hope there's some things that I gave you some food for thought, maybe some tips that maybe you can make use of. But wear it out, guys. Wear it out. Let's make sure that we survive. Well, guys, Godspeed to each of you. And as always, let's stay sharp. Let's stay safe. Let's stay vigilant.